Show. Thanks for taking time out of your day to be with us. The Back Nine Boys Golf Show is brought to you by Mizuno Golf. Reach beyond by Sea Palms Resort. Become a member at seapalms.com. By Club Car, the leader in sport, utility, and personal vehicles. By RSM, proud sponsor of the RSM Classic coming up in November, giving back to our community. And by Bridgestone Golf. Get fitted for your Tour B ball today. On the show, we're going to talk with Craig Allen about a topic that a lot of people have asked me about, general manager of the Sea Island Golf Performance Center. Craig and I talked about the difference between my clubs, my 9-iron specifically, and maybe Harris English's 9-iron. Is there a difference? Alex Urban of the Tour Championship, he's the new executive director, will be next to talk about the FedEx final event and the increase in prize money. And then we'll talk with the Global Golf Post CEO, Jim Nugent, about the LIV Tour and what he thinks the PGA Tour will do to offset the loss of players. And one of the biggest questions, are sponsors next? We'll see. First up, Craig Allen, general manager of the Sea Island Golf Performance Center. Craig and I sat down, and I asked him a question. If my 9-iron is the same as Harris English's 9-iron?
No, most of the consumer-friendly golf clubs are going to be much stronger in loft than what the tour players play. And I know that is the complete opposite of what the average golfer thinks because the tour players hit it so far. But the reality is they just have a lot more speed. And the golf courses they play, the greens are firmer, the more challenging approach shots. So they have to have some spin and some height coming into the greens. So their loft settings are a little bit more conservative, call it old school, than the average golf club you buy off the rack.
All right, you and I were also talking about shafts, and there's a shaft out there that I think it's under $1,000. It's pink, and I guess the question is it worth it?
Well, it's worth it for the right golfer, but at the end of the day, like any component or any shaft in any golf club, it's got to fit the golfer. And these shafts that you're talking about, they're called Auto Flex, and we sell them, and we've done fairly well with them. But I would say that particular shaft is fairly unique in that it has very soft profile, and their contention is that loading and unloading of the shaft is what's creating the speed. And we have found that it is very, very player dependent, probably more so than any other component we've fit in a long time, because some people are able to time it up and really get the benefits of it, and others not so much. And so when you do the dollar per yard calculation on that one, it's pretty easy to figure out whether it's worth it or not. But yeah, I think it's an interesting concept. I think it is beneficial to those who it does work for, but I wouldn't say that is a majority. It's more of a minority.
And when you change shafts or get into a shaft when you get fitted by you or your team, can you add 10, 15, 20, 30 yards to your drives?
No, I wouldn't necessarily say that. I would say that, as we spoke about previously, there's two components here. There's the head and there's the shaft, and they both have a huge role to play. I know a lot of people will tell you that the shaft is the engine of the club. I don't necessarily agree with that. I would say that the head is the engine of the club, because the fact of the matter is if the head doesn't have any ball speed, so speed off the face to start with, there's no shaft in the world that's going to make up that huge difference. So finding a head that has a good amount of performance for you and pretty good launch and spin characteristics is a great starting point. And then you take the shaft, let's call that the mechanic, to dial it all in. And I think if you can get the right combination, you can gain some yardage, but it's very dependent on what you started with. How bad was the one you started with? If you started with a really bad one, yeah, sure, we can gain 20 yards, 30 yards, whatever. If it was a pretty good one, then I don't necessarily think so. But if you get it dialed in correctly for your swing, your delivery of the club, then you need to figure out how we can get that to maximize what you need to do. And that's probably going to optimize your distance unless you personally can figure out more speed in terms of swing speed, so club speed.
Well, when you first started, you said that changed. You used to think it was the shaft that was the engine and that the head was the mechanic. And now with the technology, it's kind of reversed.
Yeah, I think in having more launch monitor data and more experience, I cringe to think that I used to say that, because, the head is just, it's what hits the ball. And the ball comes off that face. And if you just don't have the speed, I can give you a $5,000 shaft if there is such a thing. It's not going to create all that speed back. So you got to have a pretty good head to start with, and then take that shaft and fine tune it as best you can to get the launch, the spin, the total height, the landing angle, and of course the accuracy, the left and right deviation to be as good as it can to the player.
So when people come in, amateurs come in, I know the pros come in, they know how far they hit each club most of the time. But when amateurs come in, do most of them come in and say, I think I hit my driver blank, blank, and it's obviously less than that?
Yeah, I say this with the utmost respect. Most people live in a dream world, quite frankly. So, everybody says they hit their 8-iron 150, 155 yards. That is just not true. A tour player is going to be in the 155 or 60 range, and they're not within 20 miles an hour of club head speed. So there's no way that they can deliver the club in a way to deliver that kind of distance. So I think most people are elevated. They live off of their best shot they've ever hit rather than their average. And having that conversation is quite challenging. But at the end of the day, it's about getting the clubs to gap out correctly, and their tools, they only know what we tell them. And if we can get those tools to all do their job correctly and appropriately, then the golfer's in a better place anyway.
Well, and your backup now is the technology. I mean, they may not argue, but they may question what you're saying. That didn't go 150 yards. And you say, look, it's right here at 128. But you've got all this technology that's helping you with those explanations to us amateur golfers.
Absolutely. They still don't believe us, frankly. They'll say, well, I'm not swinging my best today, or I don't know. Normally I hit it further than that. And
Right.
At the end of the day, there's no reason to argue. Here's what the data is telling us today. So we're going to work off of this yardage when we gap you out. And then when you get home, if you're hitting it incrementally further, well, everything will go that much further. So that's okay. So again, just focusing on making sure that we're providing the good information, getting the launch, the spin, the total height, all of those things correct, so that the ball flight is appropriate for the club we're fitting for.
And you don't want to fit somebody to the best 8-iron that they've ever hit in their life. You want to fit them to the 8-iron that they're going to be most consistent with as far as flight and distance.
Yeah, one shot is luck, two's a trained, and three's an average. Something to that effect. So, if we can get them to hit 3 and 4 and 5 shots reasonably well, and kind of see where that puts us, the 3 middle shots will give us kind of where they really are, and then you'll have a good one and you'll have a bad one, and it's okay to drop those and look more at the 3 in the middle if you just take 5 shots and kind of live more with that number. And if you hit your career best and it goes to the back of the green, that's great. But if you're living off of your career best, you're going to be chipping and pitching from the front of the green or in the bunker more times than not.
So when amateurs come in for a fitting, which y'all do here at the Performance Center, do you find that their club head, when it gets into the ball, is where it exactly should be? Or do you find sometimes it's more closed or more open? Or is there an average on that?
Yeah, I would say most of the time it's not exactly where it needs to be, and that's why their name's not on their bag and they're not playing on the PGA Tour. So most of the time, I would say, if you were to ask an instructor or a fitter, the club is being delivered open to the path. So they're cutting the ball. So the majority of the golfers are going to put a little bit more, of a fade or a cut on shot on the ball, and I think that's the nature of the fact that we don't stretch, we're not as flexible, we're not as young or as talented as the PGA Tour players, and I'd say the majority of golfers are going to cut across the ball. It's an old school term, but their face will be open relative to the path, which is kind of one of the more weaker ways to deliver the club, and that's certainly, going back to our previous discussion about distance, that is certainly impacting that.
And when you watch somebody swing and you're going through a fitting, which may take 20 minutes, may take an hour, may take whatever, as far as they're doing one club or their whole bag, can you tell if they're coming inside from their setup or coming straight back like they should? Or would the ball flight tell you what they're doing wrong?
Yeah, so the TrackMan that we use will give us club delivery data as well as ball flight data, but that is more going to give us more information on the downswing as the club is coming back to the ball. It's not telling me anything about the backswing. That
Okay.
would be something you would have to use video, 3D, or your eyes in terms of the backswing. But ultimately, the club delivery, the club returning from the top of the backswing back to the ball and beyond the ball is kind of where we live. And we have all that information on TrackMan. So.
And you and I talked briefly about gapping of wedges. And most amateurs, I was told a long time ago, mishit a 60-degree wedge more often than any other club in their bag. What would be your suggestion as far as gapping and the highest wedge that they should have? And I know that probably depends upon the golfer and their handicap.
Yeah, I think golfers' needs, their ability levels, their tendencies. Again, talking about club delivery, where that relates to the bounce of the club. When you're fitting wedges, there's a lot going into it, right? There's gapping. So, what is the loft of the pitching wedge? How far does the pitching wedge go? Number one. Then, what is really the most lofted club they need in their bag relative to their game, their ability, their tendencies? So you try and figure out those two bookends, and then you fill in between. I was told a long time ago by a famous wedge designer that between 4 and 6 degree gap increments is kind of ideal. That gives you those appropriate gappings for your yardages somewhere between the 10 and 15 yard mark. And I have kind of lived by that for the most part the last 10 or 15 years. And once you get kind of figured out what you're looking for from a distance gapping loft standpoint, then you start looking into bounce, sole widths, those types of things, because at the end of the day, you need to get the correct, again, going back to this term of launch conditions. This is a new thing in wedges the last few years, is that it used to just be, well, how was the bounce? How's the loft? And kind of do that and be done with it. Now you have to include, are you using the appropriate club to get the correct launch conditions? So the bounce, the sole width, the loft, the club delivery, all of those things will impact how the club, the ball, and the ground interact together. And this will shock a lot of people. But if you've got say a 58-degree wedge, you're only trying to launch that thing at 28 to 32 degrees, which that's going to blow some people's minds. And I actually had a fitting first thing this morning, and I mentioned that to the gentleman, and he was like, "Oh, so you have to shut the face down. You have to hit down on it more." I'm like, "No, not at all. That's the opposite. You're trying to use the belly of the wedge or the center of the sole to make contact with the ground, and the friction, the ball grabbing onto the face, the friction is what's stopping the ball sliding up the face or launching really, really high. So it's coming out lower with a ton of spin. I mean, how many times have you seen a tour player pitching the ball to a green and it comes out kind of low and fast and you're like, oh my gosh, and then it takes one bounce and stops just on a dime.
Yeah.
Well, they're launching that thing between 28 and 32 degrees, and they're spinning it somewhere between 8,000 and 11,000 RPMs, on a mid-range wedge shot. That's how they're stopping the ball. So I think making sure that you have the right loft, the right bounce, the right sole width, and the technique is lining up with that. I think all of those things are going to help. And then making sure that your gapping is correct, somewhere in that 4 to 6 degree increment. And most of the time, I don't fit the average golfer much above 58 degrees for their most lofted wedge.
And that is Craig Allen of the Sea Island Golf Performance Center. A lot of good stuff from him about how to fit clubs and what you should be using. Recommend always try and get fitted before you get your clubs. Next up is Executive Director of the Tour Championship, which is coming up. Alex Urban will be next, but let me ask you about checking out the monthly specials created by the local elementary schools, and that's from CJ's Italian Restaurant. Part of the proceeds that the kids develop when they create these unbelievable pizzas. Some of the toppings may be interesting, but they get proceeds, they go back to you. And CJ's, their food is made fresh in their kitchen every morning, including pizza doughs, bread, sauces, dressing, toppings, meatballs, lasagna, and that list goes on. Produce delivered fresh and prepared daily. Check out the full menu, including do your own pasta dish at cjsitalianrestaurant.com.
Dr. Gio Valianti, sports psychologist, here with the Back Nine Boys Golf Show.
And welcome back. I'm Rich Stiles. The Tour Championship will be played next month at East Lake Golf Club. With us this morning is Alex Urban, Executive Director of the Tour Championship. Good morning, Alex, and welcome to the Back Nine Boys Golf Show.
Hey, how are you? Thanks for having me.
I'm wonderful. You were in Hawaii for a few years. Big change to come from Hawaii to Atlanta. How are things going for you being, it's not back in the States, but it's kind of back in the Southeast?
Sometimes it feels like coming back to this.
I'll bet it does, yeah.
Hawaii isn't a different country, but it's pretty far out there. And there's sometimes when you kind of zoom in on your Google Maps and you realize how far away from anything you really are out there. But no, it's an awesome place. I loved my time out there. Maui's a beautiful island. Century Tournament of Champions is a wonderful event. I've been with the tour for almost a decade, and that was a really cool chapter. But really excited to be here in Atlanta. And I went to college at Clemson in Georgia, so I kind of knew what I was getting myself into a little bit. So it's nice to be back in this area. I've got family in the area too, so couldn't be happier to be here and working on the Tour Championship.
Yep. And are there any big changes or any changes going on for the Tour Championship this year?
Yeah, no, I mean, as far as changes go, I would say that this is the first real year where we're full steam ahead without that 10% of thinking about what happens if X happens with COVID.
Right.
And so it's really nice to just go into it and think about a full great tournament week with all of our kind of typical events, typical week. The great thing about this tournament is that we're going to have the 30 best players on the PGA Tour there, competing for our ultimate prize in the FedEx Cup and kind of the cap of our season. So that I would say we're just excited to kind of lean back into what makes this tournament great. The biggest change probably is that our dates are now back off of the college football calendar. So we wrap up the week before, all those kickoff games, which is a fantastic thing for us.
Yeah. And in the past, there were 4 playoffs in order to get to obviously the final at the Tour Championship. And now that's been changed to 3. And I know that was done a couple of years ago, but why was that change done? Was it to make the season shorter? Was it try and cut it close to the football season?
Yeah, I think it's a number of reasons, right? The FedEx Cup, kicked off in 2007, and so we're still early enough in the kind of genesis and the process of figuring out the perfect format for that. And I think you've just seen it kind of tweak and transition over the years,
right,
to get better and better. And so this is the first year that Memphis and the FedEx St. Jude Invitational is the first playoff event, and then it'll go BMW Championship and then us. And I think that we continue to tweak to try to make that the playoffs and elevate the importance of the playoffs and where they fit in the schedule. And then, I think the date consideration was an important one as well. And then if you look towards the future with some of the announcements that were made a few weeks ago, it's going to change even again with only 70 players qualifying for that first playoff event instead of the 125. So we continue to tweak, much like other sports. You look at what's going on in college football right now, and they're tweaking.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Times they tweak their formula over the last 20 years, plenty of times.
Yeah, and it's always interesting to watch the last 2 or 3 PGA events to see who's going to qualify in the top 125, and some of them make it on the last hole, some of them lose it on the last hole, but usually when you get to the East Lake event and the Tour Championship, it's kind of usually been between the top 7, more likely the top 5 as far as FedEx points for their chances to win.
Yeah, and we switched a couple of years ago to the FedEx Cup starting strokes.
Right.
And it was done for a couple of reasons. I think one, it's nice to know in real time where everyone stands. I think in the old format, it was always tough to kind of look at the points and someone made a bogey on the other part of the golf course and how that would affect you. And I think even from the players knowing where they stood, but also as fans watching, it was hard to know exactly what the implications of every single stroke was, which in my opinion is one of the key things in watching golf is, the importance of every shot that you're watching because where everyone stands. And so you've got this kind of handicap stroke system that works now. And I think it's been a really good change. And if you think about it, if you're in the 30th spot, you start 10 shots back
Yeah, already.
from on day one. But that's not an insurmountable
No.
lead in golf. I mean, I could think of. I think Justin Thomas won a PGA Championship not that long ago. He was 7 back going into the last day.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. Yeah, and somebody that's starting out even and somebody that's starting out -10, you're right. I mean, that person down at the bottom of 30 could have
You have to play. You still have to play good golf.
yeah. They could come out with a 64 and the guy that's -10 could shoot 2 over par. So all of a sudden they're only a couple shots from each other.
Exactly.
So the winner of the FedEx Cup in the past, and I know that's changed, was not the winner of the Tour Championship. And it really became confusing. And I'm glad, and I know a lot of viewers are as well, and that changed. So the winner now of the Tour Championship is also the winner of the FedEx Cup.
Yeah, it's. I think that's another really nice change. And there was a number of years where there was kind of split champs in there. I remember the year Xander Schauffele won the tournament and Justin Thomas won the FedEx Cup.
Yeah,
I think it was probably the most recent one. And that was one of the other kind of impetus of change, is to create that scenario where it is one winner for the Tour Championship and the FedEx Cup. And I think that's been a really nice change. And we'll see that again this year.
Yeah, it's much easier to follow. Sometimes I kind of got lost in the equation that if he places second, he gets this. If he gets third, he gets this. But now it's pretty easy.
Right.
Whoever wins it all.
Yes.
And the prize
find a
money
little
changed, Alex, a little bit. I know it's happened before you got there, but now the winner is $15 million.
Actually, 18.
Oh, they've changed. Okay, great.
Yeah, it did bump up a little bit.
Okay.
With first changes earlier in the year, actually back in January. So it is quite a top prize to win the FedEx Cup on the PGA Tour now.
And so what would the 30th player get at the Tour Championship?
Say that again, sorry.
What would the 30th player get at the Tour Championship?
I don't know that number off the top of my head, but I think I'm sure it's listed somewhere on PGAtour.com.
Yep. So what's the future of the Tour Championship? Are you guys going to keep tweaking? I know you also switched the nines, so now they finish differently than they have in the past, which I know was a couple of years ago, but I also thought that was a great change, although that long par 3 was also a very exciting par 3 to finish the tournament.
Yeah, I think the switching of the nines, it is hard to finish on a par 3. Yeah, there were some great moments there. I remember when Jim Furyk made that putt in the rain.
Right.
And, I think Brandt Snedeker made a really nice putt there to win one year. But if you look at the kind of the really exciting finishes that have happened since we've flipped the nines, I think to the Tiger Woods moment of him walking down the 18th hole in that iconic shot, which will probably be in every highlight reel of Tiger Woods' in the rest of his career.
Yeah.
I think about not even on the 18th hole, but it was 16 when Rory pulled out on his way to victory there. So that was certainly a huge change. I think one that everyone's really happy with. Ending on a par 5, a little bit more chances for variability. You have birdie chance, eagles chances, bogey chances. Great par 3, the 9th. But I think it's been a good change. There's certainly been tweaks over the years, and I imagine that we'll continue to take looks at it. Where if you're not always looking at how to make something better, I think you run the risk of becoming stagnant. So we'll always take a look at how to continue to make things better. I don't think that will ever change.
Yeah, and right now, if you look at the top 30, it could change by a few players, before we get to the playoffs, and then obviously it could change even more. But
Sure.
Usually the top 10, I mean, you're going to have a darn good field that you're going to have for the top 30.
Well, those top 10 guys right now in the standings have really, I would say all of them have just been, they're seemingly on the top of the leaderboard I know that's why they're on the top of the standings, but
Right.
It does seem like they play well week in and week out. I mean, you see, how many leaderboards have you seen Will Zalatoris on? I know he hasn't notched a win yet, but man, he seems like he's contending every week.
Yep.
The season that Scotty Scheffler's had is once he kicked things into gear at Waste Management, he never looked back. And he's just continues to contend even when he's not playing very well, which is usually a really good sign. Some of those other guys in there too, like obviously what Cam Smith has been able to do. I would say his win at St. Andrews really validated what has already been an awesome season for him,
Right.
and Players Championship win and a win there and a win at Kapalua. So I got to see him win in person in Hawaii in January. He might be the best putter in the world. I mean, it's just an awesome group of guys, both young and established, and guys that are really hungry to cap off their season with a Tour Championship win and a FedEx Cup.
Well, I'm so glad that you've had the opportunity to come back to Georgia, where you've got some family, and I thank you for taking time this morning, and good luck at the Tour Championship, and just thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. Look forward to doing it again.
You bet. Alex Urban, the new executive director of the Tour Championship, going to be played at East Lake, as it always is. Obviously, the top 30 in the FedEx Cup standings. It'll be a great field. So we'll just see what happens there. Coming up is Jim Nugent of Global Golf Post. And also, if you're looking for new clubs, you want to try and look at the new Mizuno irons, the 922, 923, and 925. They will greatly improve your game. And you can check out the Mizuno irons. They will help you reach beyond, play better. And then take a look at the driver, the fairway metals. I think the hybrids are outstanding. And you're on the way to game improvement for yourself. And they've got several models of new putters. Check those out at MizunoGolf.com. Mizuno Golf, reach beyond.
American. My name's Major Ed Polito, United States Army retired, and you're listening to the Back Nine Boys Golf Show. Hoorah!
Boy, a lot of excitement there from Major Ed, a good guy, though, too. Our next guest is a friend, and he is the CEO of Global Golf Post. Good morning, Jim Nugent. How are you?
Rich, good morning, and thank you for having me on today.
It is always a pleasure. You and I just get a chance to just go through a smorgasbord of topics, and boy, have we got them this morning. What in the world, in your opinion, is the PGA going to do with LIV? I mean, they keep pulling players out. What's going to happen?
Rich, I thought you said this was going to be a short segment today.
Yeah,
it's a mess, and I'm afraid that it's going to get worse before it gets better. There are more players that are going to go after the end of the FedEx Cup season. There are more players that are going to go after the President's Cup. None of the players so far who have left would necessarily be considered to be needle movers, perhaps with the exception of Brooks Koepka and
maybe
Bryson DeChambeau. But the reality in both of those situations is those guys are hedging against bad health. DeChambeau's got a bad wrist. That's never a good cocktail when you're a professional golfer, and Koepka hasn't been healthy in a couple of years, and so they're taking the money and admitting that they're really not going to be competitive on the PGA Tour in the future. But it's a mess out there, and it's going to stay that way for some time, is our fear.
What have you heard as far as, since you brought it up, some that are leaving after the FedEx Cup? One I heard was Cam Smith after the President's Cup, which is in September. I mean, who have you heard, and what are the rumors about?
Well, Mark Leishman, Adam Scott, potentially Hideki Yatsumana. Cam Smith is an interesting one. He was thought to have been gone, and he wins a major championship.
Yeah.
Now he's going to pause and reflect, and it's unclear. He's clearly a different player and a different strata than he was before the Open Championship. He's a major champion contender now, and so maybe he'll change his mind, or maybe somebody will talk to him and try and persuade him. But those are some of the leading names that are thought to be poised to go in the late summer, early fall time period.
Well, since we're talking about the Ryder Cup and the President's Cup and all this stuff going on, Tony Jacklin was quoted as saying that the Ryder Cup legacy is done. It's now become an exhibition, and no more it's ever going to be like it used to be.
I don't share that point of view. I think that's pretty drastic and pretty far out there. There's little question that the Ryder Cup is in some jeopardy. Certainly, if the rules and regulations hold, and if the European Tour's position holds, they've lost about 20 years worth of captains with Sergio Garcia and Lee Westwood and Ian Poulter and others. More concerning is the makeup of the European squad. Right now, they've only got about 5 solid players. And if they don't start grooming their young ones, if the young ones don't advance quickly, you could be looking at the Ryder Cup returning to what it was before most of your listeners were paying attention, when it was a walkover by America.
Right.
We don't want that. We need the Ryder Cup to be competitively balanced. We need Europe to win. We need them to be competitive. And right now, they're just not. And that's the threat, not Live Golf, as far as the Ryder Cup is concerned.
Yeah, I heard somebody refer to the Live Golf as a pre-Champions Tour group.
Many people feel that way. The Champions Tour, more often than not, plays 54 holes. They're smaller fields. There are a lot of comparisons between the Champions Tour, and if you look at many, not all, but many of the guys that have gone so far, they're really not competitive on the PGA Tour.
Right.
But they're not yet eligible for the Champions Tour, and so that's where the analogy comes from, and it's not a wrong analogy.
What about the rumors of Live offering $300 million for NBC Golf. I mean, they need a TV outlet in the United States. There is no doubt.
That one's patently false. No matter how much money they offer NBC Golf, the reality is that NBC and Golf Channel have long-term contracts with
Yeah.
the PGA Tour. So does ESPN. So does CBS. There's only one possible American television outlet available to Live Golf, and that's Fox. And Fox famously walked away from golf a couple years ago, and handed it back to NBC. And so they don't show any appetite for Live Golf. And so that's a chink in the armor. If there isn't television, if there isn't American television, that's going to be a problem for Live Golf going forward.
Yeah, and they've got to have an outlet. They've got to have some way. I mean, I know they have unlimited funds, but they've got to have some way of starting to get some money back for all the investments that they've made. And without a TV outlet, or a cable outlet, it's going to be impossible for them to do that.
The analogy that they use is that they are an early stage startup in business terms.
Wow.
And early stage startups typically lose money in the first year or two. The question is going to come in the third year, just how much money is Saudi Arabia willing to lose and for how long?
Yeah.
Each head.
How did you feel about David Faraday and the announcement that he was leaving NBC for Live?
I thought it was kind of a non-event. David's best days, in my estimation, are behind him. I found him to be better and more entertaining when he was at CBS. I think he had some shackles on him when he was in the NBC Golf Channel family. So kind of a non-event as far as leaving. Might do some good stuff, though, at Live Golf, because those shackles, whatever they were, will clearly be removed. They're going to let him do and say whatever he wants.
Speaking of shackles coming off, Charles Barkley is going to play in the Pro-Am in the next event, and he thinks they're going to ask him to be part of the broadcast team with David Faraday. I'm not sure I get that. Besides a sense of humor, I don't really get that.
Well, first of all, I wouldn't want to caddy for Charles Barkley in that Pro-Am. And secondly, I think he ought to stick with TNT in the NBA, where he's really, really good. He doesn't know golf. He's not going to add any value to the viewer of Live if they ever get any television exposure. So I guess this is just another example of Charles being Charles.
Yeah, exactly. That everybody wants him. A lot of people say that Live Tour players are going to be dead in the water without world ranking points. And, this could be one of the oversights that some of these players that have already gone there, figuring that they would get world ranking points to be able to play in the majors. But it takes a while for that to be approved. And until then, their world rank as of now keeps going down.
Well, I think you've hit on the crux of the problem, and that may well become the crux of the legal argument as well. They have applied for points. There is a technical committee that has to evaluate their application. Nobody knows how long that could take. And even if the technical committee recommends it to the board has the right to say that this entity needs to be in existence for 12 months. Let's just say that those two things take 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't take 2 years for these guys to plummet in the rankings and virtually disappear.
Right.
And that means that many of them, unless they have an exemption for winning a major, most of these players are not going to be eligible any longer for the majors because of their low status in ranking points. So that's the real issue that your listeners need to keep an eye on is what happens on that front, and does that become the crux of the legal argument that Liv wants to bring?
And even if they did get world ranking points, they aren't going to get as much just due to 54 holes to 72.
And smaller fields. There's no question about it.
Yeah.
Ernie Els this week made an interesting point that I hadn't thought of. Champions Tour doesn't get official world ranking points. What's the difference between the Champions Tour and Live Golf? Very interesting analogy that I hadn't thought of.
Yeah. Let's continue. Sponsors on the PGA Tour were sold, a list of PGA Tour players, and now that list is going down a little bit. Some big names, some not. Do you think the tour could be in trouble as far as continuing with their sponsorships throughout the next couple of years?
There is risk with sponsors whose contract is up this year or next year, and they've frozen anyone who's interested in extending long term at this point in time. So yeah, that's a real point of vulnerability right now for the PGA Tour. If your agreement is up this year, and you're a sponsor and you want to continue, you've got leverage that you've never had before.
Yeah, and let's go a little bit further. And then some sponsors like Bridgestone, PXG, RSM have dropped their players who went to live. I think there's going to be more that are going to do that just because of the bad blood between the two tours.
Actually, I think that's going to happen very quietly because most of the agreements between the mainline club makers and the players are based on the appearances on the PGA Tour and official golf ranking points. And you're paid pro rata on both of those. And so if you're not playing on the PGA Tour and your ranking points decline, your compensation declines to the point where it just kind of evaporates and goes nowhere. And so the separation between the equipment maker and the player is going to happen organically and without much notice.
Yeah, and then you add in there the TV coverage that they all like to see their logos on TV. They're not being seen.
That's right. Exactly.
Yeah. But Jim, we got to take a quick break. We'll be back with Jim Nugent, CEO of Global Golf Post, right after this on the Back Nine Boys Golf Show.
I'm Grayson Phil, Professional Golf. Welcome to the Back Nine Boys podcast show.
Welcome back. I'm Rich Stiles. We're on the phone with Jim Nugent, CEO, Global Golf Post. And Jim, we have been talking about LIV. I know it's taken up a lot of media space, social media space, and I just don't see that as ending anytime soon.
No, it's not going to end anytime soon. The latest agreement between Jay Monahan and Keith Pelley, leaders of the PGA Tour and the DP World Tour, respectively, has bought them both about 18 months to figure this out, to figure out if there's an opportunity to cooperate with LIV Golf and bring them into the so-called ecosystem or not. And if it doesn't happen in the next 18 months, then it's anybody's guess what happens after that.
Do you really think that the two tours, especially with Norman as the live commissioner, can merge and can work together? I mean, Norman says he wants to coexist. That's one thing he says, but then on the other side of the coin, he just loves hurting the PGA Tour.
I think, and I learned this in Scotland, talking to many of the leaders of the industry and of the game. A prerequisite to sitting down and having substantive conversations about the future is that Greg Norman is not involved.
Really?
Yeah, I don't think that the tour or the European tour is going to seriously talk with the Saudi regime through Greg Norman. I think they're going to talk directly to Saudi, and Norman has to be out. Everyone that I spoke to agreed that that was a prerequisite to any serious conversations going forward.
Is that because he's burned so many bridges and his arrogance? I mean, I talked to a reporter last week that sat down with him for 2 hours at his office at West Palm Beach, and he said he was very, very arrogant.
He has personalized this in a way that smart business people don't. This is a 30-year grudge that he's finally being able to try and address, going back to 1994 when he tried to start the World Golf Tour. In business, you can't personalize things. You just can't do it. And it causes you to be unreasonable, and it causes the other side to lose respect and not have any trust. If they're going to have conversations, there needs to be mutual respect and trust. And that's just not going to happen if Greg Norman's involved.
I also read this week that the LPGA commissioner is interested in having discussions with LIV. What would that be about? Because you and I, the last time we talked about, do you think LIV will go after LPGA players? I was kind of confused and somewhat questioned that desire to get together.
Yeah, I'm not sure where that's going or what Molly Arkusaman meant when she made that statement. That's a real juxtaposition when you think about LIV Golf or the Saudi regime getting involved in the women's game, when women in Saudi Arabia are clearly treated as second-class citizens.
Yeah,
there's a disconnect there, and I'm not sure that I'm smart enough to understand that.
Yeah. So, in your opinion, with all of this going on and all what may be coming up in the future with the Ryder Cup, the President's Cup, and so on and so forth, do you still think the PGA Tour is in good shape?
I think they're in decent shape. They're clearly chasing this situation rather than being out in front and leading it. I think if they had a mulligan, they would use it and have engaged with Saudi Arabia and the Public Investment Fund much earlier, rather than refusing to discuss anything with them. It's put them in a chase mode, which is a position that they're unaccustomed to. But I think on the other end, they're going to come out of this okay. The pro game's going to look different than it ever did before. There's no question about that. But I think the PGA Tour in the long run is going to be just fine.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard some things, that the tour is in trouble. I don't think they're in trouble. I do think they've been wounded a little bit, but I also agree with you that they're obviously going to be coming out okay. I will tell you that I've looked a little bit at the 3M Championship it's on, and I don't recognize a lot of the names, and some of these lesser tournaments. That's what we have to look forward to, at least at this point.
Well, that's one of the issues that's kind of below the surface is the quality of fields. Are there too many tournaments? People want to see the stars, and there are not any stars in Minnesota this week, and there aren't going to be many stars in Detroit next week. And we're in the post majors, this valley between the Open Championship and the start of the FedEx Cup playoffs, and so you're seeing a lot of names out there that you're not familiar with, and they're not named Rory McIlroy or Colin Morikawa or Justin Thomas, and it's just the ebb and flow of the PGA Tour season. But I think one of the things that needs to be looked at is, are there too many tournaments?
Yeah.
You want to see the star power out there as often as you can.
Yeah, that could be one of the big changes that the tour does. And I did see that Ricky Fowler was there. He has just been absent from this last couple of years.
Well, my information is that Ricky's going to lose his tour card this year, and that's a stunning statement to make, because he, for several years, not only was a star on the course, but he was in just about every TV commercial that you saw during a PGA Tour telecast.
Oh yeah.
It's not because he's gotten lazy or he's not working at it. He's really, really grinded the last couple of years, working very, very hard on his game, but he just can't seem to find it. And he's no longer a threat out there. And if he loses his card,
that's it.
Nobody's sure exactly what's going to happen.
Yeah.
One thing I did learn this week is that his wife is adamantly opposed to him joining Live Golf.
Yeah. Jim, thank you for being with us. Always a pleasure. Take care, my friend.
Thanks, Rich.
Back9boys.com.